right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you, maybe even good night. Welcome to the On Purpose 2020 Virtual Summit, where you get the best strategies, techniques, and stories for more than 24 leading purpose coaches, all to help you discover or renew your sense of purpose, and with that, reset your compass to navigate through uncertainty with clarity and confidence. If you would like to get access to all the session recordings, you could still upgrade to the All Access Pass at only €97 via getonpurpose.co/AAP. Our guest for today, Wendy May, is a purpose coach, consultant, and group process facilitator who spent more than a decade following and teaching a goal-oriented approach to purpose. But over the years, she started noticing that is not exactly the way purpose works in the wild. She sees purpose now showing up differently, and she believes the changes and challenges that we face today require us to show up differently for purpose. With Regenerative Purpose, Wendy May shares a frame-breaking model of purpose work that is receptive, dynamic, cyclical, and interdependent. It totally flies in the face of conventional wisdom of goal-directed self-help. In a new paradigm, it's not about finding or figuring out a singular life purpose, and it's not about defining or diagnosing your purpose. New paradigm purpose is about engaging in co-creative conversation with our shared reality. It is about embodying the purpose that is always already here. It's about cultivating equalities that allow this force of nature to flow. I, for one, am keen to dive into this topic. Make sure that you engage with us and others on the call via the chat, and also ask your questions via the Q&A button or by raising your hand. And then after the presentation part of the session, we'll have a Q&A conversation with Wendy. So you'll be able to then either be on mic or get your questions answered. So with that being said, Wendy, welcome. How are you? Hi, good. Good to be here. How are you doing? I'm well, actually. It's springy in Holland, so sun is shining, the birds are singing, so it's that always kind of makes me happy in a way. Yeah, today's the last day of the summit, huh? So things have been going well. Actually, yeah, it flew by. It was I think actually November or so last year that I kind of had this idea. Let's do this, and then of course several things happened along the way. But yeah, here we are, last day. Yeah. Yeah, well, here I am, part of the grand finale, I guess. Yeah, I like also having you on the last day because your topic is probably a bit more on the edge, if you will. It's newer and emerging, and so I think it's it's a good spot for you to be to be part of the summit today. Yeah, I like to think so. Let's see. Yeah, to be honest, as I was getting ready to log on today, I feel myself a bit with a heavy heart, just with everything that's happening in the world right now. Just it's intense, so it's just to set the context, I guess, for people who might be listening to this later on. It's Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020, and it's actually Blackout Tuesday, right? So it's there's something going on social media today in show of solidarity, and a lot of intense things happening in the world. So yeah, I feel myself a little bit with a heavy heart, but also, the paradox of that is just feeling actually how important purpose is in this moment, that this is actually something that we really need to engage in and have these kinds of conversations around. So really grateful to have this space to dive into that a little bit more. Great to have you. Yeah. So I guess in terms of context, one of the things that I think about in terms of what's happening in the world right now is, there's sort of a triadic nature of reality, I guess, the way that I look at it. So we have right now an incredible amount of prosperity in the world on the one hand, and we have an incredible amount of adversity on the other hand. And then of course, when you look at that duality, what becomes really apparent is that there's also a lot of inequality and injustice, right? So the purpose conversation that we're having is emerging in that space, a lot of prosperity, a lot of adversity, and a lot of inequality and injustice. So it's kind of puts a lot of pressure on us right now to ask a question, if we're people of privilege, which I would consider probably everybody who's listening to this is someone who has a relative amount of privilege. What is our responsibility in that space?
right, with what's going on in the world right now. And it's just, you know, obviously, like, we're in a collective moment of grief and a collective moment of feeling a lot of loss, right? Loss of stability, loss of security, loss of identity. And that's really disorienting in a way, right? So it's, yeah, it's very present, right? So anybody who's read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning knows that this is like sort of an interesting paradox, right? Where we face this survival threat almost, right? So, and I would say at this point, we're talking about survival of the entire human species, right? We're facing possible extinction, and this is pushing us to really explore what does it mean to be self-actualized as a human being, and what does it mean to express our purpose or to embody our purpose, right? So that's kind of the background for me. Is there anything you wanted to add to that before I kind of go into regenerative purpose specifically?
No, I think you nicely summarize our conversation so far. It is more important than ever, but at the same time, it also feels probably more daunting, if you will, than ever. So it's no, I think yeah, you summarized it nicely. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, and the whole privilege and purpose conversation is probably a topic for another day, but that's a very complex and nuanced conversation as well. What I wanted to do today is share a little bit about my model of regenerative purpose. And you're probably going to hear me talk about old paradigm purpose and new paradigm purpose and sort of making comparisons between the two. So I just want to sort of make a disclaimer before I go into that to say this is not to discount or diminish any of the work that's been done so far that is still being done in sort of the more traditional methods of approaching purpose. I would say that my comparison of old paradigm and new paradigm is really just to help us focus on what I think is important moving forward, right? So a model of purpose or a way of looking at purpose that I think is more fitting for what's coming. So just that little caveat before I go into my comparison slide. So let me actually pull up my screen and I will speak to that a little bit. Hang on. Here we go. Okay, so you see the first slide, yeah?
Yep, we are.
So regenerative purpose. So what is regenerative purpose? I guess the easiest way for me to launch into this conversation is to talk about what regenerative purpose isn't. And I'm not going to go through all of these details, but I do want to, touch on a few of these things and talk about why I think some of these older ways of looking at purpose might be limiting for us. So one of the dimensions is the idea of purpose being an objective versus a practice. So when we look at purpose as an objective, it becomes something that we need to seek, something that we need to find, something that we need to figure out. This is what I'm talking about when I say that mostly we've usually looked at purpose as a goal-oriented approach, right? Something that is aspirational in a sense, right? That we're moving towards, right? So this is that objective view. So one of the things that I think is limiting about that perspective is that when we treat purpose as an objective, it can create a hierarchy because there are certain people who identify themselves as having purpose or not having purpose, right? So that creates all sorts of distorted ways of thinking. It creates this sort of purpose, it creates a binary division between purpose haves and purpose have-nots, right? So it contributes in a sense to this inequality in the hierarchy, even if we're doing it to ourselves, right? And it can lead to things like having purpose shame or purpose lack or purpose anxiety, right? So I have a lot of clients and people that I speak to about purpose who express some kind of anxiety around, I don't know what my purpose is, right? So this is something that is weighing on us in a sense, right? There's that heaviness of purpose when we treat it as an objective. In the new paradigm of purpose or in regenerative purpose, I'm talking about purpose as a practice, right? So it's something that you include and embed in your day-to-day way of living. So it is something that really is accessible to anyone at any point, no matter what your station in life, no matter what your financial situation or your identity or your job or your context, right? So that when purpose is a practice, it puts us as purpose practitioners in the driver's seat. It puts us in the director's chair, right? So we're calling the shots when we treat purpose as a practice. So that to me is a much more empowering way of looking at purpose, right? So it's not something that you have to find or figure out or diagnose or discover and then be able to hang your hat on it. It's something actually that comes through daily devotion, right? Through small choices and decisions that we make every day, the ways that we align our energy, our time, our money, and attention on a day-to-day basis, right? So in a way, it's small and it's also super huge, right? Because when you think about it, you know, what we're doing in this life, choosing how to use our life energy, that's really it. That's the whole thing, right? So, and I could similarly kind of go down the list and go into each of these comparisons in more depth, but I'm just going to touch on a couple others. So this thing that personal versus relational. So this is something that I feel is really important because we often talk about my purpose, right? So we think of purpose as something that is associated with an individual, something that belongs to us, right? Just like we have my house, my job, my spouse, my child, my desk, my car. We have my purpose, right? Something that we own, something that belongs to us, right? When we look at purpose as something that is personal, I think the thing that limits us there is that we kind of stop listening, right? So once we've sort of have it, we think that we figured it out. There's a connection to life and a connection to others and a connection to the collective that kind of gets forgotten. It's just that the moment that we think we know something, we stop asking questions, right? And the moment that we think we have the answer, we stop listening, right? So there's a danger, I would say, or a pitfall to purpose being something personal rather than looking at it as something that's co-created, right? That it's dynamic, it's something that's part of the relational field between you and me, or between me and the rest of the world, right? Between me and my community, that it's a dynamic thing that's always being generated and it's not entirely dependent on me in isolation as an independent actor. So that's something else that I wanted to highlight in here. And then I'll talk about the last one just quickly and then I'll move on. This idea that purpose is formed versus purpose being experienced. So a lot of times traditionally, when we talk about purpose, we often think about the form of purpose, right? We think about what the project is, or the retreat, the program, the business, the nonprofit, whatever it is. It's the creation, it's the form that we create from purpose that we tend to associate as being our purpose. So again, there is value in that. And what I want to bring to the table is that there's a potential pitfall in that as well, right? Because when we're focused on the form of our purpose, it actually feeds into what I think is a rather toxic mindset that's gotten us into a bit of trouble, which is the perpetual growth mindset. So when we think about purpose as a form, if we're not careful about managing that, we can get really attached to that form, right? We create a business, we create a project, we create whatever it is from our purpose. And again, it's related to the point that I was making before about not listening. But when we get really attached to the form of our purpose, we can kind of lose contact with what it is we're really seeking when we seek purpose, which is, I think, an experience, right? That we want to feel alive. We want to feel aligned. We want to feel that our life is of use. And if we get too fixated on the form, we can potentially create another trap if that form is no longer aligned, right? Because life is dynamic, things are changing, we're in cycles, we're constantly sort of dying and being reborn. And when we get really, really attached to the form of what we've created, it can lead to this, what I call personal empire building versus collective wave making, right? So we start to get too focused on building up our own little purpose empire of whatever it is, whether it's a yoga school or a retreat program or you know, clean water system somewhere. It's just becomes sort of distorted in the sense that we've lost what the impulse of purpose was to begin with sometimes, because we've gotten too attached to that form. So I guess maybe I want to pause there, Hans, and just see if you're still with me. Does that make sense?
Yes, I am. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So let me continue then and talk about regenerative purpose. When I talk about regenerative purpose is something that I would say requires ecological consciousness. It requires interdependence awareness, and it's something that's never achieved, but it's always accessible. So before I go into the model of what regenerative purpose is about, let me just, I guess, pay my respects to the lineage where this comes from, the thought lineage where this comes from. So this 4-part purpose diagram is something that might be familiar to a lot of people. It has sort of made the rounds on the interwebs over the past, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, this Venn diagram of purpose, which shows purpose as the intersection of what you love to do, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you get paid for, right? So the idea of the Venn diagram being, okay, solve for where these 4 things overlap and boom, there's your purpose, right? So again, you can kind of see in this sort of diagnostic approach to purpose, and it's a static thing, it's fixed, it's a solution to a problem set basically, right? And in this conventional model of purpose, let's call it, humans are independent actors focused on their personal projects of empire building, right? And so I've already talked a little bit about what some of the potential limitations of that might be. And what I want to see us move towards is a regenerative model of purpose, which is a flow. It's a dynamic cycle. It's not a static solution to a set theory problem. It is a perspective that treats humans as being interdependent, right? That we are basically all part of a bigger movement that's includes us and is also beyond us at the same time, right? So this is what I call planetary movement making. So in a sense, engaging in regenerative purpose is a decision to participate. It's a decision to engage. It's a choice to say, I am going to use my space, you know, my body, my time, my energy, the assets that I've been given to serve this larger force that's beyond me, that includes me, right? So then, okay, how do we do that, right? So then purpose becomes basically a process of cleaning and clearing out this vehicle that we have, right? This human life that we're bestowed. And we do that by cultivating certain qualities within ourselves. And there are 4 core purpose qualities. I'm going to get into that in a moment. But the idea being that, going back to the idea that purpose is a practice, that instead of trying to find out or figure out or diagnose or discover what our purpose is, that we simply clean and clear our vehicle, right? Our human life, our personal space, our time. And we cultivate these qualities. And when we have these qualities developed, which is pretty much a never-ending lifelong process, that purpose flows through automatically, right? That it naturally and effortlessly wants to come through us. And our job is basically to clean and clear the vehicle for it to use our life, to use our life force. And we do that by working on ourselves, right? It becomes an inward journey. It's an inner work process versus an outer work process. And it does become manifest in the outer world, but the attention is actually inside first, right? So it's an inside job. We look at how are we doing with these 4 core qualities? What is our relationship to those qualities? How can we cultivate that in our lives more and more? And what are some of the practices that we can embed in our lives in order to allow purpose to move through us? So this is the regenerative purpose flow model, and it is based off of the 4-part purpose Venn diagram. And all of these graphics are available on my website, regenerativepurpose.com, if you want to download this infographic. That's available there. But basically, this is sort of the next evolution of that 4-part Venn diagram. So in the 4-part Venn diagram, I'll just go back for a second. On the left side, we have what you're good at. And here, in the regenerative purpose model, that becomes gift, or genius in fluid truth. And the reason why it's named that is because it does include what you're good at, which is typically what we think of when we talk about gifts, right? We think of gifts as being pretty much equivalent to talents or skills. But genius in fluid truth is actually beyond that, right? And this is where we could get into a discussion about privilege, but I'm going to resist the urge to go there. It's the genius in fluid truth includes everything that we've been given, right? So it includes earned gifts as well as unearned gifts. And that can be circumstantial, it can be capabilities, it can be characteristics, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that are included in gift that build upon and expand this idea of what you're good at. It actually includes the totality of everything that you've been given that you can use as an asset, right? And there's this fluid quality of it, and there's a truth to it, a genuineness or an authenticity, right? So that's related to the core purpose quality of this quadrant, the gift. Moving on to the top part, and I'm going to go around the circle and to follow the flow. In the traditional model of purpose, the 4-part Venn diagram, this dimension would be called what you love to do. And here, I see it not as a what, but a how. It is the movement of love, right? And so roughly speaking, you know, from the left side to the right side, it's a movement from the individual to the collective. So this creative flow is actually the flow of energy from the individual to the collective or to the community or to the greater good, you could say. And again, there's an expansive definition of this that goes beyond what you love to do. And what I always like to say is that purpose is not what you love to do, it's what you do from love. So that's a very subtle but important difference for me, that, you know, we don't always necessarily enjoy or find blissful our purpose work, but we do have this experience of flow, and we're in creativity, we're responding to life, we're not doing things from automatic programming, right? There's a generative nature of creating something new, a new approach, a new perspective, new models, right? Like we're talking about now, we're creating something that didn't exist before. And in a sense, that's, I believe, the birthright of being human, is that we're all creators in a sense, in whatever dimension you're in, whether you're in engineering or in medicine or education or personal development, right? That there's creative flow for all of us, that we don't necessarily need to be an artist or a dancer or a singer to express that creativity. So moving over to the far right, where I have pain, which people have interesting reactions to sometimes, but in the old model, this was called what the world needs. And in regenerative purpose, this pain, it is the collective element, but it's actually personally activating information that we receive from the world. So in my opinion, the idea of what the world needs is a bit of a projection, right? It's a savior mentality to think that we know what the world needs. And actually, if we focus on that, we get overwhelmed because we can see that the world needs a lot of things, right? There's a lot of help and a lot of healing that's needed. So how do we actually focus and find our lane, find our place in this whole mess, right? To me, the key is pain. It's personally activating information. So thinking about the collective element is really not so much a concept or an idea about what we think is needed in the world. It's more about noticing our own sensitivity to what's happening in the world, right? So when we feel particularly triggered by something or particularly moved by something, that is information for us to focus. And of course, you know, with everything that's happening in the world right now, even with that as a, you know, sort of frame, it can be still very overwhelming. But I think the key here is and the quality here is attunement, right? So it's all about being able to filter out noise, being very conscious about the media that we consume, the information that we receive, the conversations that we're part of, having discernment around that so that we can really use our energy and not let it be drained by all of the things that are happening. And we can actually zoom in on the best place for us to serve. And pain is a signpost to that, right? If you think about pain in the physical body, it is a signal, basically, to your brain to pay attention to that place, to focus attention and energy and resources there. So that metaphor plays out on a larger scale as well when we think about the pain that we see and experience and observe in the world. So that's the collective element, or personally activating information. To complete the cycle, so the old model, the bottom dimension is what you get paid for. So this could be a whole nother talk by itself as well around our relationship to money and resource and abundance and how all of those things can be mistakenly conflated sometimes. But I'll just speak briefly about this, which is the movement of energy from the collective back to the individual. So in order for the cycle to be sustainable, this is really important, right? And a lot of people who work in purpose businesses or, you know, have purpose on their minds and hearts, this is missing for a lot of people, which is why I think a lot of us feel really tired right now. Because this work is depleting if we're not allowing ourselves to be sustained in some way. And it's about abundance, not money. And actually in my book, I go into great detail about the difference between abundance and money. So I would say here briefly that abundance is something that includes money, but is not just money. So similar to all the other dimensions that I've defined, there's an expanded understanding of what this dimension is about. It's not just what you get paid for. That's part of it, but there's also receptivity is the quality here. There's a receptivity to guidance. There's a receptivity to support. There's a receptivity to synchronistic connections, right? Like how I got connected to this conference, for example, right? So these things that happen that seem to be almost by magic, right? That sort of push and pull us in a particular direction. There's a receptivity to that, as well as being responsive to the money or resource, right? And it's beyond just money, but material resource, financial resource, technical resource, all the different kinds of resources that flow to us that give us feedback, essentially. So this is a feedback loop. And in terms of what I was saying before about, you know, not getting too attached to the forms, this can also be a form of feedback. If we're listening to let us know when the form that we've created needs to die, needs to be shed, needs to be transformed, or maybe handed over to someone else, you know, different stages of transition and transformation that happen. So this is that listening part. So yeah, that's the last slide. And yeah, just to, I don't know if I named all of them as I was going around, but just to go through and talk about what the 4 core purpose qualities are that help to create movement in these different areas. The purpose quality for gift is authenticity. The quality for creative flow is responsiveness. For pain, it's attunement, that one I mentioned already. And for abundance flow, it's receptivity, right? So if we are practicing purpose, part of that is really about looking at our relationship to these qualities, right? So how authentic are we? How attuned are we? How much are we responding, right? Responding in a creative way and moving from presence and moving from love versus being in reactivity or following the program of our conditioning. And then how much are we receptive? You know, not just to being supported financially, but how much are we receptive to everything that life is bringing to us? Yeah. So I think maybe I'll pause there, Hans, and see if we have any questions.
Thanks a lot, Wendy, for sharing. And for all of you on the line, of course, just raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly or type your question in the chat box. My question to you, Wendy, is I know many people join the summit because their question is, you know, what's my purpose and how do I kind of, you know, live it or apply it or, you know, are you saying this is more advanced or this is just another way of, so you first need to figure out that one thing and then you can quote unquote, you know, move forward to your next paradigm, or is this just a completely different way of looking at what purpose actually is?
Say it's additive, right? So this process of figuring out a focus, I would say, to me, it's temporal, right? Or it's temporary. You can find a focus for now in terms of where you want to put your energy and your time and your attention. But then regenerative purpose is a way of staying open to life as you're doing that, right? That it's not something that's just encoded in your DNA and there's just like one imprint and that's it, you know, that life is alive and that we are alive and that the pace of change that we're facing right now actually requires us to stay flexible and adaptable and be open to serving purpose in different ways, right? And that we all need to be listening a lot more. Instead of having a preconceived notion that might be programmed about what we think our purpose is, to, yeah, do your purpose if you think you know what it is, but be open to that changing. And that it's also a process of personal evolution, I would say. For me, you know, I talk about something called what I call the Mobius strip of meaning. So you know what a Mobius strip is? Yeah, it's this like weird geometrical figure that's like has 2 sides, it looks like, but it's actually just one side. So for me, this Mobius strip of meaning has to do with our own process in healing ourselves as we're helping others. So, you know, we often look at those 2 things as diametrically opposed, right? So do I take care of myself or do I take care of other people? And I would say that one of the signposts or the markers of being on purpose in a regenerative purpose kind of way is that we are really challenged ourselves, right, to grow. That it's uncomfortable sometimes, that we have to shed our own concepts about ourselves, our own sometimes security. You know, sometimes we sacrifice relationships with people that aren't on board with where we're going, these kinds of things, right? So there's a whole interweaving, I guess, of the individual evolutionary process and the collective evolutionary process. So for me, I can say, you know, my own purpose process has been, you know, at some points joyful and blissful and amazing and feels magical. And then there's times when it feels really hard. But I know when I'm on it because there's always that little edge, you know, that edge of like what I call the personal evolutionary edge of like, ooh, this is just slightly uncomfortable for me, right? So that's a growth edge for me. And as I'm working through that resistance myself, whether it's, you know, resistance to becoming more visible or, you know, doing more online, you know, social media or promotion, it's like me going through that process is also part of my purpose, right? So
beautiful. Okay, Some questions coming in. By the way, so Carl is asking, what's the website again for the slides and graphics? And then Fur is asking, can you repeat the 4 skills we have to work with?
Yeah. So the website is regenerativePurpose.com. And you can go on there and there's a link where you can download the infographic. Mm-hmm. And the 4 purpose qualities are authenticity, attunement, responsiveness, and receptivity. And those 4 purpose qualities, let me go back to my screen, maybe share so I can point to it. So the 4 core purpose qualities are connected to these elements, right? These expanded elements of the new paradigm purpose, I guess is what I'm calling it. So authenticity is what helps us connect with our genius in fluid truth, or our gift.
Right.
Responsiveness is the quality that allows us to tap into creative flow. Mm-hmm. Attunement is what makes pain actually useful, right? Attunement is what allows us to digest pain and make it into useful information. Mm-hmm. And receptivity is what really unlocks this abundance flow, that movement.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Emily, you're with us.
Yes, hi. Wendy, I don't have a question so much as a comment, rather. Thank you. That was absolutely mind-blowing. I think it's the first time that I have heard purpose put in this way, in this approach. So I was just curious, how long have you done this work, and who are you working with, and is the world ready for this sort of approach? That's one question. And then I just wanted to highlight again that the link between purpose and how it is about ourselves, how we make purpose ours, our mission to be good, be better, be seen in a certain way, and how closely linked it is to ego. The serving others is so closely linked to how we identify and what we, the self-value that we attach to ourselves. So that's another question. Maybe you can just comment on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a tricky thing, the ego, huh? It gets involved in everything. So your comment brings to mind one of my favorite sort of quotes from the book. So I guess I will quote myself here for a minute, which is that, you know, from the perspective of regenerative purpose, basically that everyone is valuable, but no one is important. Everyone is unique and no one is special, right? So this is this idea of basically giving your life over to something that's bigger than you, right? So it's this idea that, yes, we have a choice as individuals, whether we want to engage or participate or not. And what's in it for us is basically our experience of life, right? Do we want to experience life feeling alive and feeling aligned and feeling connected to something? And I would say, I think most of us would say yes to that. And then there's this idea that it's happening without us anyway, right? So this is the whole thing around planetary movement making, that all of the things that are happening in the collective right now, whether, you know, your swim lane is around social justice, is around environment, clean water, ocean plastic pollution, solar energy, you know, it doesn't matter what your swim lane is, there's a lot of other people that are working on that, right? So there is a sense of, yeah, we're all valuable, but nobody's important. We're all unique and no one is special. So it's kind of happening anyway. And then we just get to decide if we want to be part of it or not, right? So there's a relaxation that comes with that, I think, because also this like idea, the savior, like sort of ego can be really heavy, right? You're like, oh, you know, like I have so much responsibility because I'm privileged, I have to do this and that. But actually that's ego, right? So if we kind of recognize that, yes, I'm a choiceful person and I can choose to participate and you know, contribute my life energy to this movement or not, and it's also happening without me, right? So even if I don't do anything, it's going to happen, right? These waves are all happening already. I don't know if that answered your question or not, if I just went off on a tangent.
It did. But do you feel the world is ready for this sort of approach?
I really hope so. I really feel like it's kind of now or never. I mean, we're at that moment now where we really need to get things moving in a different direction. And I would say it's not enough for purpose to touch on what we're doing. Our way of relating to purpose has to also encompass how we're doing it. And I would say this, find and figure out your purpose is more about the what. And what I'm talking about is more about the how.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And also Milene is making a comment here on the chat. Really inspired by viewing purpose this way. It helps ease the pressure and need to find the purpose versus co-creating it as part of life experiences. Surrender to a power higher than us, but taking inspired action. Love it, she says. That brings a question to me. So, I mean, earlier in the summit, we had some conversations, especially on the group coaching calls, where it was like, how do I know, I'm on track? This is the right thing to do. I guess this is even in a way harder in the regenerative purpose setting, because it's, how do you know, you can surrender? How do you know what is your thing versus, everyone's thing? I mean, how do you quote unquote know you are, on track, if you will? It's not
Yes.
the right language, of course, but that's why I asked the question this way.
Yeah, I understand the question. And actually, it's super simple and super difficult, right? So it requires a whole nother level of self-awareness and a discipline around self-inquiry, I would say. But I did some interviews for the book, and I asked people exactly that question. How do you know when you're on purpose, right? What is the experience of being on purpose feel like, look like, smell like? How do I know when I can touch it? What does it taste? So there were 4 themes that came through in those interviews, which I think not coincidentally map quite neatly to the 4 purpose qualities. And the things that people said repeatedly in different words were, when I'm on purpose, I feel like myself. So this to me is that authenticity part, right? I feel like I'm true to who I am. I'm not faking, I'm not performing, I'm not pretending. I'm not subscribing to someone else's plan. Like, I'm doing me the most real way and deep way that I can, self-expression, right? So that was one thing that people said when they are on purpose, they feel comfortable being themselves. Mm-hmm. The other things that people said were, I feel like I have a flow state, basically. So this idea of being in flow, where you're doing something and time disappears and you are just kind of out, right? The mind is not doing tasks, but you just kind of, your time and space kind of gets a little fuzzy, and you feel like, maybe you've been working for 8 hours, but it feels like 8 minutes, this kind of thing. Or you have like an indescribable amount of energy that you're pouring into something that you're creating, and it feels effortless, right? So there's this flow state. And that's the other thing that people say. Of course, people have their own ways of describing that, but I think you get what I mean. Another way that you know that you're on purpose is if you feel that you're helping, supporting, contributing, that there's something in it for others, right? So this contribution to the collective or connection to community, the interdependence awareness is what I would call it. Mm-hmm. And the last piece around how you know you're on purpose is that you're being supported, not just financially, but that you're being supported by synchronistic meetings, introductions, connections, sort of magical happenings. And there's just this sense of you're being held by life, right? There's a comfort and relaxation in knowing that you can trust, right? That what you're doing is supported by the collective energy. So those are sort of some of the signposts, I guess I would say, to know that you're on it.
Building on that, Farah's asking, and let me kind of, let me just read it aloud. It's probably better than trying to paraphrase it. So Farah is saying, I love that I was just thinking lately about not thinking in terms of money, but in abundance, as I've been a very lucky person in my life in terms of abundance, friendships, amazing experiences, knowledge, food, etc., but not really in terms of financial resources. I would like to increase my material resources now. How do you suggest to be more open to receptivity?
Yeah, well, that's a super complicated question, and I don't know that I can answer it specifically without knowing more about your own personal history and stories with money. But I would say that more broadly speaking, there's individual work around that, we all have our own histories with money, about how money was handled in our family, you know, how our mom or our dad treated money, the kind of socioeconomic situation that we grew up in, all of those factors, right? So I think part of it is individual work of going into your own money stories and money beliefs and things that might be blocking you around, you know, I can tell you one of mine, which is that I left my corporate job 5 years ago, and I have a limiting belief that making a lot of money means selling my soul, right? So I have a little bit of a disconnect of being able to do something that my heart says yes to and being able to make a lot of money at the same time. So that's a limiting belief, right? That might be blocking money from coming to me. And I would say there's also collective work around this. And so there's a section in my book where I talk about what I call economic ecosystems. So there's systemic work that we need to do around this, around nourishing economic ecosystems. And that has to do with all of us decide to put our money energy. So the way that money flows in an exchange, one thing is about how it comes to us, but the other thing is how we spend it, right? So if you think about the collective ethos around where are we putting our value, right? Where are we assigning value? And value comes in many forms, right? Which translates into money, actually. So we spend hours a day scrolling Facebook or, you know, whatever it is, right? That's money energy in a sense, right? That we're putting time and attention into these things, or we buy things on Amazon versus buying from local small businesses, right? So there's this collective healing that needs to happen around our exchange systems. And in the book, I talk about one practice around creating what I call double plus exchanges, right? So it's the idea that it's not a give and take and there's a zero-sum game, but the idea that in the process of designing an exchange, we actually create more than what there was before. So yeah, I'm not sure if that really answered your question, but I would say that in a nutshell, there's individual work around it and there's also collective work that we need to do around it.
Thank you very much. I think it does answer the question. We have Jay on the line as well. Jay, welcome.
Thanks, Hans. Hi, Wendy. How are you?
Good.
That's good. Thank you so much, Wendy. This was pretty profound for me. I was just sort of working on something this morning, and I was thinking sort of how we could look at the conventional paradigm versus regenerative, and I think it really is about energy. And I know with myself, like coming up under that sort of capitalist, individualistic paradigm, I think my energy in the past when I'm trying to deliver something is like, I've got this, you know, I'm self-sufficient. It's almost an energy of dominance, which in the past has, you know, under that sort of old paradigm, you know, that can sometimes work. So I think I really need to just make sure that I'm checking that energy and tapping into that regenerative, interdependent sort of mindset. So it is a big change, and it's shown me that I've got a lot of work to do. Do you have any tips for like at the beginning of the day, like tapping into, like maybe meditation comes to mind, but tapping into that sort of regenerative energy at the beginning of the day? Is there anything that you do for that?
Yeah, I mean, so I will tell you the practice that I do most consistently is that I draw freehand mandalas almost every day. And this practice is actually linked more to the creative flow dimension because it sort of takes me out of my thinking, planning mind, because I'm basically just I basically force my mind into a flow state by doing these freehand mandala drawings every morning. So that's probably, apart from sitting meditation, my most consistent practice. And I would say, yeah, practice is really personal. You know, you have to find what works for you. But I know, you know, in personal development sphere, like gratitude is a big buzzword as well. But I think, yeah, if you can get beyond sort of going through the motions of doing a gratitude meditation and somehow really notice, like in your day-to-day life, gratitude for little things, especially gratitude for things that might not be pleasant, if that makes sense, right? So oftentimes when we do a gratitude meditation, we think about things that are good. I'm healthy, I have a nice house, I have great friends, you know, but it's that being able to find gratitude for the things that might be difficult or, yeah, uncomfortable is something that helps me to tap into the web, right? The web of life that feels benevolent, right? That feels that even if this is a hard lesson that I'm learning right now, that there's some awareness that this is actually supporting me in a way, right? So just to give a personal example, I had an online store selling biodegradable glitter as one of my many little business ventures that I recently closed because of COVID, right? So the sales basically went to zero since festivals and gatherings are more or less canceled for the rest of the year. And that was a bit painful for me, right? But then when I look at that sort of uncomfortable event in my life, I can also feel gratitude for that when I look at the whole web of life and how everything is interconnected, and see that, okay, I don't necessarily have clarity around why that is going out of my space right now, but I know that it's making space for something else. Maybe it's making space for me to do more interviews about regenerative purpose. I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I love that. I think it all comes back really to making sure that we're taking that time to, reflect and look inward and cultivate. And it's inspiring.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Ever since Emily asked this question, are we ready for it, Wendy? I was actually thinking, and I think the comment by Milena, I think, it's almost like, hey, it eases the pressure, your model. It does feel slightly different, at least in my perception at the moment. So we're talking about something I think that takes a lot of courage to want to even engage with, right? Like embark on in terms of like exploring this. Because if I look to the world, I mean, after COVID-19, I don't know how high the percentage of people of the population just wants to go back to normal, right? So let me buy my stuff, let me be able to go out and travel, and I mean and I understand that kind of response. People want just their normal lives, and for most people that almost that means. At least it seems like, not thinking too much about the important things, happening in the world, like the bigger challenges, if you will, and like linking that to what I do on a day-to-day, that maybe government or, corporations should be more green, and, but I just, I buy indeed, maybe I am for like local shops, and like, if you ask me, but I'll still buy wherever I get cheapest, right? So I would say, especially also in these times, this takes a lot of courage. So building on the question, is the world ready for it? How can we as individuals kind of get ourselves ready for it, and kind of not see this as a kind of a maybe someday type of thing.
Start small. I think that it gets really overwhelming when we think we have to change everything in our life all at once. But really seemingly small decisions add up to a lot when we all do them. Right. So, I mean, we've seen the impact of like everyone not traveling for 2 months and how the planet has recovered. Right. So, I just decided to take my book, Regenerative Purpose, off of Amazon. And that's a pebble in the pond as far as Amazon's concerned. I'm not going to take down Amazon single-handedly. But in my own little pond, I have some influence. So when I made the decision to take my book off of Amazon, and I wrote a Medium post about it, and I shared with my Facebook community, it influenced some other people to also not renew their Prime membership, or, actually think twice about what are they really supporting when they buy things on Amazon. So that's just an example of something that might seem like a really small thing, but it's actually a really big thing. And yeah, you're right, it does take courage, right? Like, as an independent, self-published author, to not have my book on Amazon feels scary. Like, how could you not be on Amazon? That just doesn't, but this is the thing, as pioneers, it is up to us to sort of stand in that gap, right? And when we talk about the economic ecosystem where we have value exchange that's based on a different system, we're not there yet. We're really far from that, right? So that means those of us that are going first have to have the fortitude and have to have the courage to stand in that gap. And it might be a while, right, before the rest of humanity catches up with us. So it's also a test of our resilience and our commitment. It's also why we need each other, why we need community around this. And I would say it's also our responsibility, those of us who have privilege, to be the ones to stand in that gap, because those that don't have as much privilege are really fighting for day-to-day survival, right? So those of us who have the privilege to have this time and space to reflect, it is up to us to be the ones that go first and to stand in that gap while the rest of humanity catches up.
Okay, makes sense. Anything else, Wendy, that you would like to add to the conversation?
I think we've covered a lot. I could go on for hours, but I know we don't have that time. So hopefully this is something that's, yeah, inspiring some people to think differently, and yeah, we'll have further conversations. It's just the beginning. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, we're not going to go to Amazon, but we're going to find your website and buy a book there. No, I mean, and I agree. I mean, we could talk for longer. I mean, the whole summit. I realized this is a conversation that, you know, it's hard to do that in a week or like in an hour in 2 weeks. But at the same time, that's also, you know, it's in the end, it's about more than a conversation. It's about actually doing things. And I think you helped us look at it from a new angle. So thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if people want to get in touch with me, you can follow me on social media on Hey Wendy May on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Medium. And the website again is regenerativePurpose.com.
Beautiful. Thanks a lot, Wendy. And thanks to all of you on the line for joining as well. The next session is actually starting in a couple of hours, so make sure that you don't miss that one. See you there. Thanks for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.